and hopefully all of this will work well so we can have that available later on. But I'm Ruth Roselle, and as director of the Buttrey Center here at Central Seminary, I do welcome each one of you to this two-part series. Today, we're talking about stepping up for creation care, why the church and people of faith need to make climate action a priority. Now, that's a pretty long title, right? And pretty self-explanatory. But I want to point out that I am approaching this topic of our climate situation from the perspective of faith. And for me personally, that is Christian faith, although other major religions have some similar teachings. And while many churches do teach about creation care on a Sunday or maybe a few Sundays a year, this presentation will hopefully help us to see that climate action needs to be a priority, both as individual people of faith and also as faith communities. So this week, we're going to look at the biblical, theological, spiritual, ethical, scientific, existential, pastoral, ministry reasons that we need to be concerned about the climate crisis and make it a priority. And then next week, we will look at what we can do as people and communities of faith to address it, focusing particularly how we can be a part of reducing greenhouse gases, including the carbon dioxide that's being released from fossil fuels. So if you haven't already registered to be a part of part 2 next Wednesday, same time, please do that. It's a different Zoom number and a different registration. And you can find that on either the central Facebook page, the Buttrey Center for Peace and Nonviolence Facebook page, or the Central Seminary web page under the events section. Before we get started, I want to introduce to you Dr. Jessica Williams, who will be monitoring the chat and Q&A because I can't do both. Maybe because I'm of the older generation, I don't know. Jessica is the Director of Ministry Education for the Cairo Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice. And she also serves on the Buttrey Center Advisory Group, and I'm really grateful for her assistance and for being with us here today. So Jessica, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Ruth. I'm glad to be here as well. So just a few housekeeping items. If you would please keep yourself muted, that just helps us cut down on the background noise so we can make sure to hear the wonderful presentation today. If by chance you unmute and you find that I've muted you again, please don't take it personally. It is just a way to cut down on the background noise so we can be sure to hear Ruth and the wise words that she'll share with us today. We are recording this session so that others who aren't able to join on this day and time will be able to view this session. And so you'll also be able to view this session later and share it with others if you wish. We will share the recording with you. As we get started, please go ahead if you would and put your name in the chat, your name, your location, congregation or organization that you're with, and any information related to our topic today and why it is of interest to you. Also, as we go along throughout our time together today, if you have any particular questions or comments that you'd like to share in the last 10 minutes of our time, please go ahead and put those in the chat as well. I'll be monitoring the chat and we'll open up time and space at the end for Dr. Roselle to answer your questions. Again, please, you can let me know if you're having any issues with tech and I'll do the best I can to try to help. Thanks, and I will turn it back over to Ruth.
Thank you, Jessica. So as we get started, let me first tell you a little bit about myself, why I care so much about this subject and how I'm going to approach it. So I'm a mother of 4 grown sons and daughters and a grandmother of 2 little ones. Like many of you who are parents or grandparents or uncles or aunts, I fiercely want a good life and a flourishing earth for these most precious ones and for all young adults and children of the world. I live by a small lake and I love walking and watching nature and growing more and more in love and appreciation with it and its restoring effects on me. And so I long for its long-term well-being. It's within nature, within creation, that often I most sense the wonder of God's mysterious presence with us. Professionally, my sense of calling has been basically to care for others, but the focus has varied through life. I started out as a registered nurse, moved on to be a pastor, and then a pastor of pastoral care, then a pastoral counselor, and then teaching here at the seminary in pastoral theology. And as a pastoral theologian, I have felt my interests change and grow from caring for individuals and families and congregations to caring for justice and peace within society, to caring for the well-being of the earth, because all of those are interrelated and affect individuals. So today I speak as a pastoral theologian whose discipline is to bring into conversation theological disciplines with scientific, social scientific disciplines for the purpose of better understandings and better practices of care for people and communities. I received training and resources from the Climate Reality Project and Eco America's Blessed Tomorrow. And some of the slides you will see over these two presentations are from them. So let's get started with the biblical theological reasons that climate action should be a priority. Let me share a screen with you. Let's see. I always have trouble when I share the screen that they hide the place where I can start the slide. So sorry about that. Okay. So let's get started. The Genesis 1 narrative of our origins tells us that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth and all that is in them. That God delighted in what was being made and declared it all very good. And it is indeed very, very good. When you think about all the animals and all of the plants and the beautiful sceneries that we enjoy, there is so much that is so wonderful about the world. According to this creation narrative, humanity was created on the sixth day, along with all of the other land creatures, once everything upon which we depend was in place. The description of humanity's creation in Genesis 2 emphasizes our interconnection with the earth. It is from the soil of the ground, and in Hebrew, the word is Adamah, that the first human was made. And the Hebrew word for that first human is Adam. So that little wordplay reminds us that we are made of the elements of the earth. As our bodies were made from the soil, they again become part of the soil and death. Our lives at their most elemental level are intricately interrelated with the land. We are part of this earth. And in fact, every breath we take, every sip of water we drink, every bit of food we eat expresses our dependence upon and interrelationship with the earth. According to Genesis 1 and 2, God's initial instructions to humanity were to cultivate and to care for the land, or those words could be translated to serve and preserve it. It indicates that we are created in the image of God to function as God's reflections and representatives in the world. Under God's benevolent reign, humans are to exercise dominion, not dominating, using, and abusing the earth in any way that we desire, but as those that God has given unique capacity to oversee and care for the earth. The Hebrew word that's translated dominion is actually radah. So it must be understood not as dominating, as using and abusing the earth in any way that we choose to do so, but rather as overseeing and caring for the earth. The Hebrew word translated have dominion, rada, is to be understood in terms of caregiving, nurturing, and not exploitation. That's according to Old Testament professor Terence Fratham. Also, he suggests that the word subdue or kavash used here refers to cultivating the land or developing it to its fullest creational potential. This means that people cannot simply use and abuse the earth in whatever way they want. Duke professor Ellen Davis writes, the earth is neither a platform for human activity, nor a repository of resources to be mined for our convenience. Far from being inert, the earth is living and responsive to God. It generates life, putting forth vegetation in response to God's command. As those whose lives come from the soil and continue to be intricately interconnected with the well-being of the earth, as those made in the image of God to be a reflection of God, as those designated in God's benevolent reign and given power and capacity, according to this narrative, to act on God's behalf, we are to be caretakers and master gardeners of the earth, so its beauty and its abundance and its balance endure for all future generations. According to this biblical understanding, we are given the special capacity and responsibility to do this. As we move further through the Old Testament, we see instructions to care for the land given to the ancient people of Israel. They are to regard the land as belonging to God, and therefore they are to care for it. Every seventh year, there is to be a Sabbath of complete rest for the land, even a Sabbath to the Lord. Faithfulness to God apparently involves good agricultural practices and care for the land. The effects of human action and sin on the land and its inhabitants are also indicated in the Old Testament. In the Genesis 3 narrative of the fall, the first sin is portrayed as not accepting limitations placed on an aspect of nature, the fruit of a tree, and in the process, disobeying God's command. This human sin of grasping for more resulted in the land being cursed, no longer flourishing and living up to its full potential, but instead being filled with thorns and thistles, making human work to produce food from the land more difficult. This idea that human action and sin have damaging, even devastating effects on the earth's land is expressed by the prophets as well. For example, here in Isaiah 24, we read that the earth dries up and withers, the world languishes and withers, the heavens languish together, the earth lies polluted under its inhabitants, for they have broken the everlasting covenant, and therefore a curse devours the earth, and its inhabitants suffer for their guilt. Therefore, the inhabitants of the earth dwindled, and few people are left. We see that again in Hosea chapter 4. There is no faithfulness or loyalty or knowledge of God. Therefore, the land mourns, and all who live in it languish, together with wild animals and birds and fish of the sea that are perishing. But the prophets also, and especially Isaiah, envisioned that the earth would again be renewed. And they fleshed out a picture of a peaceable kingdom where life on earth would be as if God reigned in every single aspect of it. Under God's reign, there is justice and peace between peoples. There's harmony with nature. War is eliminated. Oppression is gone. The earth is flourishing and abundantly providing. People and animals, lions and lambs, as we think of it, live peaceably together. And every person has enough to enjoy the goodness and joy of life. Those prophetic writings of Isaiah were often read and quoted during the days of Jesus' life and help us to understand what Jesus was talking about. We know that the primary message of Jesus was about the kingdom or reign of God. He taught his disciples to pray, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth." The vision of God's just and peaceful reign is a compelling vision to which Jesus calls us to follow him in bringing into being. In that very familiar passage in Matthew 25, Jesus identified himself with those who are most vulnerable, those who are hungry and thirsty and strangers and naked and sick. And what we do to them, he says, is what we are doing to Jesus. People currently are suffering and dying because of the climate crisis, and it is going to be much worse unless significant action is taken. Being a follower of Jesus requires us to address the climate crisis because it is essential to caring for those with whom Jesus identified. And it is essential for seeking God's reign of shalom, peace, and well-being on the earth. Just as God loves us, God loves the earth and everything in it. In John 3:16, it says, God so loved the world. Now that Greek word there is cosmos. The cosmos, the world. There are a lot of meanings to that word. In Greek, it can mean the whole universe, it can mean the whole world, it can mean the people of the world, it can mean the people of the world that are opposed to God, depending on the context. And perhaps in John 3:16, it's highlighting a bit on the people. But I would suggest that we consider its meaning here to include more than just people. Surely God loves all that God has made, all of creation, and we are to love what God loves. The Apostle Paul picks up on Hosea's image of a mourning land when he wrote in Romans 8 about the whole creation groaning as if in childbirth and waiting for the children of God to be revealed. He writes, "For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. For the creation was subjected to futility in hope that the creation itself would be set free from bondage to decay and will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God." We know that the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now. Oops. So this New Testament scholar, N.T. Wright, very prominent scholar, notes how up to this passage, the letter to the Romans seems to have been primarily focused solely on the salvation of human beings and their being conformed to the image of Christ. Suddenly, we have these verses, and God's concern for all creation comes into view along with the global and the cosmic dimensions of salvation. Creation is eagerly longing and waiting for those who have been redeemed as children of God and who are growing in the image of God's Son, who is in the image of God, to finally be revealed and take their place as God's image bearers and wise stewards of the earth as they were originally intended to be. Creation has been subject to bondage and frustration, a reference to Genesis 3 curse, because of humanity's sin. But as the children of God increasingly reflect God's glory or revealed presence to the world by being God's agents in bringing wise and healing restoration, creation will experience the freedom of being liberated to become what God created it to be. N.T. Wright states, "The purpose is never simply that God's people in Christ should resemble him. It is that as true image bearers, they might reflect the same image into the world, bringing to creation the healing and freedom and life for which it longs." Well, let's turn to our own spiritual experience. Another reason we should treasure and care for nature is that it is often through nature, God's creation, that we most deeply experience God. The psalmist writes, "The heavens are telling the glory of God." Nature isn't simply material and physical. It mediates and it is alive with the spiritual. Think of how many times in scripture God is revealed through nature, to Moses in a burning bush, to Elijah in the sound of sheer silence, and as NRSV puts it, after nature's wind and earthquake and fire. Think of how often Jesus went into nature to be by himself, to discern God's presence and wisdom, and how he taught about nature to reveal spiritual truths. Think of your cell and how nature has touched and replenished your spirit and reveals to you the splendor and wonder and mystery of God. As we grow in our love for nature, for God's creation, joining God in loving it, we will want to care for it. We will want to preserve its wonder so that future generations will also experience its beauty and the sense of awe that points toward God. So let's think together, how is humanity doing in carrying out their responsibility to care for creation? To figure that out, we need to learn some things from those who have expertise in this area. And so we are going to look at some of the facts determined by the research of climate scientists. The situation we are facing is one that has been in the making for a number of decades. We have been burning fossil fuels since the industrial age began, but that has increased dramatically within the last few decades. Now we are spewing out 162 million tons of human-made global warming pollution every day, as if the atmosphere is an endless open sewer. And I should mention that this fossil fuel has really upticked since the mid-1950s and is continuing very strong. And when I think about that, that's about many of our lifetimes. Many of us were born in the 1950s. It's been during our lifetime that this crisis has really emerged to where it is. Over time, this pollution of greenhouse gases has thickened the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere so that more energy is coming in from the sun than is going out. It's trapped inside. Previously, there had been a balance, the same amount going in as going out. But now that balance, because of the thickened greenhouse gases, it's off. It's retaining more than it's sending out. And here's the situation for the global surface temperature, that over the decades, it has been consistently rising. Each year, there's some variability, but the trend you can see there is going up. The result, of course, is that there has been problems everywhere that is a result of the global warming. Warmer oceans increase the speed and the destructiveness of hurricanes, increase the amount of precipitation that they release. Hotter temperatures over land increase evaporation, dry out the land, and then what evaporates contributes to this huge amount of rain that falls in some places later on. Hotter temperatures cause more lightning strikes on forests that are drier, causing more ferocious forest fires. And of course, all of this affects the ability of the land to grow crops that feed people and for wildlife in oceans and land to survive. So we're seeing a great increase in these effects, or the intensity of these effects, and starting to connect the dots to understand that the greater threat of these natural disasters is related to climate change. Scientists are warning us, in fact, that we're getting into some serious trouble. Natural disaster events have been increasing throughout the world. Again, notice the trend. Scientists know that temperatures rise as carbon levels rise, and that level has been between 180 to 280 parts per million during the time that humans have been on the Earth. And now it is over 417, much, much higher than we have ever seen it before in terms of human existence. Over the last 21 years, 20 of them have been the hottest years on record, and the hottest 8 have been the last 8 years. There have been increasing numbers of heat waves, and in some places, temperatures have been so high that the capacity for humans to live there is being threatened. Each year, we're increasing record high temperatures. Now, this is for 2021, and you can see that there are a lot of record high temperatures that were recorded. The fear is that we are going to reach tipping points when there will be a sudden climate changes that then cascade to more rapid, irreversible changes than anticipated, and a sharp rise of greenhouse gases and global warming. So one example would be like when the northern regions, the Arctic areas, as they melt, there's tundra underneath that could release a lot of greenhouse gases. Scientists talk about a carbon budget, which is the amount of greenhouse gases that can be emitted for a certain temperature of global warming. If we exceed this budgeted amount, global temperatures will rise higher than there. So to not exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is what was sought by the Paris Agreement and recommended by climate scientists, there is only a relatively small amount of carbon left that can be emitted compared to what we have already emitted. And at our current rate, we will have exceeded this amount in 9 years. So then we'll be moving on to the next, to the next one. Despite all of the talk within and between nations and the accomplishments that have been achieved, greenhouse gases continue to rise. Even if nations keep the promises they have made so far at the Paris and Glasgow climate summits, scientists project that instead of bringing down greenhouse gases, they will increase 14% in the next 9 years, making 1.5 degrees Celsius limit by 2100, probably unattainable and maybe more likely to rise to 2.4 to 2.7 degrees Celsius, which is Fahrenheit is roughly double of that. One UN fast facts information sheet on climate change states the current path of carbon dioxide could increase global temperature by as much as 4.4 degrees Celsius, 10 degrees Fahrenheit, by the end of the century. So Dr. Robert Davies, who is a physics professor at Utah State University and works with the Utah Climate Center, helps us see what we are facing. Here is his projection of our future according to what decisions we make. And this was found on the Christians Caring for Creation website, which is an organization that I'd encourage you to go to their website and look at the wonderful, especially these wonderful videos. Yet there's quite a number of them about helping us understand climate in layman's terms, and learn a bit more so this all becomes more understandable. But here he is showing us, according to our choices, what our future could hold. If immediately we do everything we can to curb carbon emissions, that'll lead to a low carbon future. And he would say, up to about 2 degrees Celsius. But if we continue doing what we're doing and we continue to emit carbon at our current rate, greenhouse gases and the temperature could steeply rise to 4 degrees Celsius and continue. You can see the slant there. It will continue to go up. This is what that looks like in terms of the heat. Now, this is from the visualization studio of NASA. With a low carbon future, we go up 4 degrees more Fahrenheit. We have some warming, but if we don't do anything and we head into that plus 10 or plus 13, you can see things are much, much hotter. Now, this is the change of temperature. And you can see the northern areas are hotter. So the Arctic is increasing in heat about 4 times faster than down here at a more temperate or more at the equator. Here's we can see the difference in that future in terms of soil moisture or dryness of the earth, which of course affects food and water. So I encourage you to check out those videos. And I think that the founder and CEO of Don Gordon is on this Zoom call today. So I want to express my appreciation to him for making this resource available to you. Well, let's move on. So what we are facing is an existential crisis, a potential crisis of our existence, or at least the existence of a large part of humanity and other living creatures. And what makes this an urgent issue, and therefore one that should be a priority, is that as a world, we need to address this immediately. The next 5 to 10 years are absolutely critical for the future of us and the earth, and the sooner the needed changes are made, the better, because it'll be less expensive, less will be lost, and it's less likely we're going to hit one of those triggering events that are going to cascade greater greenhouse gas emissions. In order to have a livable climate future, scientists are saying we must cut our greenhouse gases by 45%, or roughly half, by 2030, and then again by half by 2040, and then again and half by 2050, to hopefully soon moving to net zero carbon emissions. That means that right now we should be reducing greenhouse gases by 6 to 7% per year. Instead, they are increasing across the world, and here in the United States, they have increased by 1.3% this past year. It is an urgent situation that is a crisis. We call it a crisis because we're not adequately doing what needs to be done. A crisis means we need to act immediately. It means it's a critical time when our decisions make a big difference for the future. It also means that good decisions can potentially lead to good outcomes. I'm reminded of a fire we had on our roof a number of years ago. We happened to be home, and a worker on our deck happened to be home, and he happened to look up and see some flames coming out of our roof. He came in and told us, actually quite calmly, but let me tell you, we scurried very fast with hoses, climbing ladders onto that roof, because we live about 20 minutes away from any fire engines. And the sooner we got at it, the better the outcome would be. And it was a fine outcome. We didn't actually have much damage to the roof. That's where we are right now. But let's shift a bit and turn back to some of the reasons our faith compels us to address climate crisis. Most Christians and people of faith understand that part of faithful living in response to God is helping those who are mostly in need. Again, that familiar passage in Matthew 25 has Jesus identifying with those who are most vulnerable. People are currently suffering and dying because of the climate crisis, and it's going to get much worse if significant action is not taken. And it is especially the poor and the vulnerable that will suffer the most. When weather disasters happen, it is the poorest who don't have the resources to escape and so suffer. When the waters rise, when the hurricanes come, when crops fail and prices rise, it is the poorest who don't have enough money to eat. When there are extreme life-threatening heat waves, it is the poorest and the homeless who don't have ways to cool down. There will be many more climate refugees seeking a home. If we as Christians feel we should help those most in need, we need to address the climate crisis because it is making their problems greater and causing ever greater need and suffering. And those are the things that we as people of faith know we need to respond to. The climate crisis is also an ethics and justice issue in many ways, not only within our own country, do the poorest suffer the most, but there is gross inequity between nations. Developing nations who have emitted the least greenhouse gases are feeling the effects and are suffering the most, with the fewest resources to respond. In our country, we're feeling the effects, but much less so than in developing countries where poverty and underdevelopment and lack of financial resources make them especially vulnerable. For example, Pakistan has emitted less than 1% of historical carbon emissions. But if you remember this year, they experienced about a third of their land underwater due to monsoon rains that were intensified by climate change. The whole continent of Africa is responsible for only 4% of carbon emissions historically, but the African nations are the most vulnerable to climate change impacts, and right now have a drought going that is deepening poverty and hunger. Here we see kind of a graph that, and we notice that the 23 wealthier developed nations with just 12% of the world's population are responsible for 50% of historical carbon emissions, while the rest of the 150 nations have emitted the other half with the rest of the population, right? What would that be? 88% of the population. The United States is the most affluent country, and in large part, it's been built up and developed its wealth through the use of fossil fuels. And historically, it's the world's largest carbon dioxide emitter. It's not the largest one right now. Actually, China is, like this year probably, but historically, we have emitted, this country, about a quarter of the carbon emissions, and we're 4% of the world's population. Of course, as people of faith, we should be concerned for future generations in the existence of humanity, right? If we don't respond appropriately, Earth's conditions could be much more unhospitable for life by 2100, when many of our grandchildren will still be living. It is unjust that we maintain a way of life that continues to create greenhouse gas emissions at our current rate, when it will result in substantially more difficult life and more suffering for those who come after us. And it is unjust that we have already used much more than our share of the carbon budget, and yet we keep using more. Let me say just a few words about the economy. Not often do we talk about this, maybe in faith context, but it greatly affects all of our well-being. People often say that moving away from our current fossil fuel-based system toward a clean energy one would be bad for the economy, but that's not really accurate. I think it is playing on our fears and our reluctance to change. If we continue as we are now with increasing carbon emissions every year, we will continue to have more extreme weather events that cost billions of dollars, and that'll keep going in intensity. The sooner we make this transition, the more money will be saved, and in the process, good jobs will be created. And of course, the more planned and careful we transition to a clean energy economy, the better it will be. Another reason, as we go back to thinking about faith communities, is their relevance. Congregations and church leaders have been concerned and mourning the absence of younger generations. There's probably many reasons that they're not as present. But one thing we do know is that the climate crisis is an issue about which there's a great deal of concern generally, but among young people especially. In a recent study of 16 to 25-year-olds in 10 different countries, nearly 60% said they were very or extremely worried about climate change. 77% considered the future to be frightening. 56% agreed that humanity was doomed. Over 50% felt sad, anxious, angry, powerless. Over 45% said their feelings about climate change negatively affected their daily life and functioning. And a recent Pew Research study of Americans found that Actually, it's 67% of Gen X respondents said climate action was their highest priority, and 37% said it was their number one personal concern. About 32%, more than any other generational group, had personally taken some kind of action this past year. So if churches are not even talking about this or doing everything they can to address it, how likely are younger people to think that the Christian faith or the church have any relevance to them or importance for the well-being of our world? Which leads us also to a final reason for making climate action a priority, in that it is a caring pastoral response to the deep anxiety, grief, guilt, and hopelessness that many are experiencing today related to the climate crisis. Young people are especially experiencing this as they look into the future, and they feel worried and frightened and doomed. Some young couples are deciding not to have children because of the world situation. But eco-anxiety or climate anxiety is not confined to the young. It's a common and it's a realistic response once one realizes the reality of what we are facing. All of this indicates a need for pastoral care. As with many situations, pastoral care for those who are anxious and hopeless about the future because of climate change involves opening up space for people to talk about it. It involves empathically listening and validating the feelings that people have and teaching coping skills. But probably one of the most effective ways to help people to deal with it and to feel more hope is to help them get involved in doing something, some kind of climate action, especially in solidarity and in community with others. If they can be guided to take constructive, responsible action that will contribute toward reducing greenhouse gases, lessening the damage, or sustaining important aspects of life, their psychological distress will lessen. Taking a stand for climate action and doing something renews one's sense of agency and dignity. Doing what we can to live a sustainable lifestyle is what can reduce despair. We are in a climate crisis, and it is urgent that we as people of faith and faith leaders address it. Dr. Davies, along with other scientists, say we have all the technology that we need to do this, and more is being developed all the time. What we lack is political and communal will to do it. What we need is a massive people's movement to change that. And it seems to me that people of faith and faith leaders should be at the forefront of such a movement. Faith leaders still do have some moral influence, and all of us have circles of relationships to reach out to. The climate change crisis is not simply a scientific problem or a political problem or national or global problem. It is a spiritual problem. According to our sacred scriptures, the initial instructions that we humans received from God was to be God's caretakers and stewards of the earth, preserving this paradise as home for all creatures. These scriptures really express immense respect in making us partners in caring for the well-being of the earth. It seems that maybe in large part, that's why we were created. That was our special role. And we need to step up to that role as never before. I'd like to wrap up what I have to say today before a time of comments or questions by having us engage in using a little bit of imagination and envision a world that can be after we have addressed the climate crisis. If some of this material is new about the climate crisis, you may be feeling some distressing feelings or anxiety. So let's take a few minutes to take a big breath, to remember that we do have the solutions. We just need to do them, and to envision what the future could be like. such a world would no longer use fossil fuels. Imagine a world where all our energy is renewable, using wind and solar energy, which is endless. Our electric cars will be quiet, with little maintenance, fun to drive, with quick uptake. Those walking on the streets will smell clean air rather than gas fumes and enjoy a quiet walk. We will cut our lawns quietly with electric engines. The sky will be bluer. There won't be toxic leaks that pollute the oceans and land, so it'll be healthier. With reforestation and lots of green spaces, animal and bird life will be renewed so that there may be more bird song. When we start drawing down the carbon from the atmosphere, mostly probably through restoring of nature, perhaps the oceans will become healthier and the coral will revive. And in the process, we will have learned how to reduce our energy use. We will be healthier, and we will have learned new ways of living sustainably within our earth home. And we will be closer to what God intends us to be. Keep your envisioned world in mind. It can give hope and energy. The dream of a renewed earth is possible because we know what to do and have the technology to do it. So please come back next Wednesday at the same time so that we can learn together what we can and need to do as people and communities of faith. Well, I am going to stop my sharing at this point and hand it over to Jessica. Jessica, please let us know what you've been seeing and maybe what questions or what comments people would like to make.
Sure. Well, first, just a little housekeeping note that I put the registration form for next Wednesday's session in the chat. So if you have not already registered for that, please do so you can join us again next week. First, another kind of logistical question, Dr. Roselle, is if your presentation, if your slide deck will be available after this in addition to the recording. You're muted, Dr. Roselle.
I'm so sorry. I don't know if the slide deck will, because I've used some slides. The climate crisis slides were all from other entities. And so I don't know if the slides can be distributed, but the video recording will be. So you can certainly watch that. And if there is particular need for certain kinds of slides or whatever, please be in touch with me directly. And I can work with you on seeing what I can provide for you.
Very good, thank you. One comment early on is, as we hear the directive to cultivate and develop creation, I wonder if creation has the same directive in relationship with us. Wondering if you have any reflection or thoughts to share around that.
Yeah, that is kind of interesting. It makes me think about parenting. I'm not sure if this is the direction that the question was going, but you know, when you have a parent and you start when you are a parent and you start taking care of a little baby, you really grow a lot through the process of caring for a child. You grow spiritually. And I also saw this even as we take care of older people. When we're in the place of taking care of people, we grow. So if we are interacting more with nature, if we are involved in the care of nature, it actually will start to change us. And I think spiritually shape us more and attune us better. It certainly, it does change us. So for example, let me talk a little bit about what I've experienced. So I think a lot of us grow up having a very human-centered view of the world. It's all about us. And I have to tell you, the Bible is a book by inspired humans from God, but it's about humanity mostly. And so it's understandable, but it's not all about us. And as we're engaged in nature, and actually we find out that all little aspects of nature have really important roles. Maybe, I mean, we're kind of dependent on all of them. They don't depend on us quite as much, to be honest with you. We're dependent upon them. But as we get involved with nature, then nature, I think we start to spiritually think things differently. So once upon a time, I'm embarrassed to say this because probably maybe none of you have ever thought this thought, but up on the high mountains in Colorado, there are just gorgeous wildflowers. And I had a thought quite a number of years ago that was like, wow, there's all these beautiful flowers, even though there's no people here to see them. As if wildflowers are up there only for people to see. Now, that's a very kind of human-centered way of looking at things. Now I see myself as just interrelated with it all. You know, the air we breathe in is given to us through the process of leaves and plants, and it's all a marvelous system. So those are some of my thoughts, but I wonder if that's what the question was heading toward. Would someone, maybe someone has a comment about that? Jessica, I don't know.
Yeah, perhaps. Does anyone have a comment to share from Dr. Rozelle's reflection on that?
Thank you, Dr. Rozelle. This is Denise Hill, and I posed that wondering early on. And as you said, we are all in relationship with each other and with creation. And I like to think of what is reciprocal as well as what we are doing. So thank you for your illustrations. Those were great.
Thank you, Denise. A couple other questions here in the chat. The first one from Josh. Thank you for your thoughtful presentation. How do you theologically hold the tension between the localized environmental destruction, biodiversity loss, and human exploitation in mineral production for non-carbon-based emissions with a need to reduce CO2 emissions?
Okay, so there's some destruction, there is potentially some destruction for non-carbon based, like solar panels. Is that what it is? Solar panels, things like that. Say the question one more time, Jessica, I'm sorry.
Sure, I'll read it again, and Josh, if you want to jump in and clarify, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll just clarify, sorry. So my background's in geology. I'm a geologist. I've studied green energy and energy production, and all of our energy production requires exploitation, right? So we're mining, so we're talking about lithium, we're talking about rare earths, and a lot of those are done in places where mining technologies are bad, and we're exploiting local communities. And so how do you hold the tension, right? So if we're reducing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we're exploiting people and the environment and local biodiversity. And so there's a theological tension there. And so could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thank you, Josh. Very good. I thought that's what you were doing, but that explains it better. I mean, you point out something that is difficult, and the non-carbon emitting energy sources, they're not totally perfect in terms of, you talk about lithium and rare earth minerals and stuff like that. The way I think about it is, well, first of all, within the climate action movement, there is a deep concern for justice. And it's expressed all the time, workers that are going to be displaced off fossil fuel, we need to find ways for them to have jobs. So there is a deep concern for justice. And what you're talking about is justice both for the earth and for the peoples of it. So what I would say is, for all of the earth to be able to survive well, we really do need to keep moving in this direction. And the destruction of drilling and oil spills and all of that is tremendous as well. The fossil fuel energy also has a lot of problems. So we keep trying to do better in terms of not exploiting people who are mining, not exploiting indigenous communities, more scientific things are looking at batteries, so maybe there's more recycling of lithium. So we need to keep doing that. It's not like it's easy, but it feels like the only way forward and the less destructive to biodiversity and the earth's exploiting the earth is in the direction of clean energy versus fossil fuel energy. I guess we kind of live in this tension, don't we? We never are perfect, even as humans. Right now in our society, just to live, we are part of a problematic system. One thing we can do is reduce our energy use a lot. And maybe that's part of holding the tension. I think about what can I do in terms of my own life to reduce my carbon emissions, but just to reduce energy use so that I have a lighter footprint on the earth. And we will talk about that next week, but that includes all sorts of things, and not only related to that. People do need energy to live, to be heated, to cook, so we are in this dilemma. So what is not the perfect with absolutely no problems involved, but what is the best route forward for sustainability and for the well-being of the earth? But thank you, Josh, for bringing that up, because it isn't perfect. It's better. It's a lot better. But we do have to be very attentive to the justice issues and the exploitation issues related.
Thanks. One last question here. Are you aware of engaging age-appropriate digital environmental awareness education models, and are such resources being used in schools and churches?
That is an area I don't have as much knowledge about as far as with children you're talking about. I think there are things being done, but that is not an area of expertise. Is there anybody else on this? I think we need to do this very carefully, to be honest with you, so that our children learn to be good stewards, but they don't get totally, just hopeless in the process of understanding where we are. In fact, I find I kind of want to shield my kids a little bit from that. So it really has to be presented in a careful kind of manner. And I think, the tendency sometimes is yay for those teenagers, that are protesting across Europe and across our country and whatever. They're doing such a good. We should not leave the climate crisis up to teenagers. My gracious, it has been within our generation, those of us who are, a little bit older, not you young ones. We need to be doing something about it, everything that we can. But perhaps, is there someone else on the call that maybe does know of good resources? I don't see anyone, so maybe it's an area. I don't know if I'll get it done by next week, but this may be an area that we need to look at a little bit more within the church, how to do this in a way that's sensitive and just helps with the stewardship aspect. That's a really good question. All right, is that it, Jessica? I guess we're at 1.
We're at 1. We had one more comment just pop up if you'd like to
Sure,
proceed.
go ahead.
From Helen, technology has a place, but restoring natural systems, reducing our carbon footprints, as Dr. Rizal suggested, and living more simply that others may simply live must be front and center in lowering carbon emissions. Yes. And then just much appreciation and affirmation for your presentation today.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, that is very good, because restoring nature is a very big part of all of this as well. So that helps a great deal. Okay, well, thank you so much to each one of you who are here on this call. Please do come back. I know that we kind of talked about the imperative and kind of the reality of the climate crisis. I hate to have you lingering right at that more difficult spot maybe, but please come back and learn more about what we can do and be a part of, so that we as people of faith are engaged in addressing the issue and making a difference. Thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you.